I'm Mark Vernarelli, and welcome to Inside Harford County, a program where we sit down with our community leaders and discuss the issues important to the citizens of Harford County. Kicking off 2026 today with a visit to one of Harford County's absolute hidden gems, Tudor Hall in Bel Air. You may recognize it as the former home of John Wilkes Booth, but there's a lot more to the historic site than its most famous or infamous resident. Joining us now is Tom Fink, the president of the Junius B. Booth Society and the director of Tudor Hall Museum. Tom, thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
What a story. You know, Tudor Hall, there's only been 4 sitting presidents assassinated, and one of the assassins spent a majority of his life in Harford County.
Exactly.
Hard to imagine that, but of course, everybody who knows Tudor Hall knows that it's the former home of John Wilkes Booth, but it's also the home of the Booth family, and what a revered acting family they were, right?
They really were. You know, Junius, when he first came over to America in 1821, he became the greatest Shakespearean actor in the United States in the first half of the 19th century.
Wow.
And his son Edwin ended up becoming the greatest Shakespearean actor in the second half of the 19th century. He actually changed acting.
World-renowned actors, and,
yes.
and here they were eventually in Harford County. Before we talk more about them, what drew you to Tudor Hall, and how did you get interested in all this tremendous history in this place? We'll talk more about that in a moment.
Well, I've always been interested in history, but a friend of mine gave me a book, American Brutus by Michael Kaufman, and it was about the assassination, but it also introduced me to the rest of the Booths, which really fascinated me. And then I found out about Tudor Hall, and in 2006, Harford County purchased Tudor Hall, and they were going to open it to the public, and that's how the Junius B. Booth Society began. It was a little bit predates me, but by the time I came along, I convinced David Craig to turn it into a museum and open it to the public. So
wow.
It really is a jewel
An
of Harford
jewel.
County.
Yeah.
It is.
Owned by Parks, or operated by Parks and Rec, and I know County Executive Castley is a huge fan of this because of the historical significance, and you can't really deny that. As far as Junius Booth goes, he was, shall we say, quite a I guess the right word is scoundrel in a way, and also a ladies' man. And when he came here, he brought his acting prowess here, and he came from England, and he brought his entire family of actors here. And Tom is going to tell us more on that story directly from Tudor Hall.
When he was 16 years old, he saw his first play at the Covent Garden Theater, and he said, that's what I want to do, is act. So fast forward, he went and found a place where he could start doing acting at 16 years of age. He eventually joined a traveling troupe to Europe and sailed over to Europe, and they were traveling all over Europe doing plays. It was not the top actors at the time, but he was getting a lot of experience. And he was staying at a house of a woman whose daughter staying there was beautiful to him, and they eloped. It was Adelaide Delanoy, and against mother's wishes, they went to England, lived with the father there, and lived there for about 5 years with the father. They had a son, Richard, and at the end of this 5 years, Junius met a flower girl outside Covent Gardens, and he just was taken with her, with Mary Ann, and they traveled through Europe. Supposedly they had a wedding ceremony, which wasn't legal, but I think Mary Ann thought it was legal, and they eventually left Europe for the West Indies and eventually to go to America for acting purposes. Now, what did Junius tell his wife? Well, he told his wife that he was going to America for opportunity, and he was going to send money home and take care of them, and which he did. So eventually they landed in America, and Junius started going up and down the coast performing. the time they landed, Mary Ann was pregnant with Junius's child, and then they gave birth to his first child. She was born in South Carolina. He was born in South Carolina, and 2 years later, he had another child, Rosalie, and she was born in 1823. Now, as Junius was going up and down the coast, and of course he was very popular because everyone knew him as the great London Shakespearean actor, so everybody wanted to book him, and so he's very popular, and he was a very bombastic, interesting actor. And so he made money, and he came to next to this property on a land, that'd be over there if you were looking at me, inside the house, and he rented a log house. And in 1822 and 1823, he stayed there during the summers, because in the summers, people didn't act in theaters. It was too hot, and Junius wanted to get out of the city in case he bumped into some of his friends from England who found out he had another family, so I think he was half hiding out here. Also, it was cooler here, and to get away from the possibility of disease, like cholera and things, which ran in the summer. So at that time, his father came over and stayed with him. In the following year, in 1824, he purchased 160 acres of this land here. And the following year, 1825, he purchased 17 acres. So what he did was he actually bought the log house he was staying in at the adjacent farm and moved it with logs, rollers, horses, people from all over, farmers, everyone came to see this. They'd never seen anything like it before, and they didn't think it could be done. Well, he moved it across the meadow, and right out front here in Tudor Hall, slightly to my left, he put the house there, and he built additions on it over the years, and that's where 8 of the 10 children were born to Mary Ann and Junius.
Wow, Tom, I'm watching your impassioned and excellent discussion about this, and I'm also thinking to myself, you're standing in a virtual treasure trove of artifacts. Talk about some of the things that are in that house.
Yeah, right now we have the original mirror, the hallway entrance mirror that originally hung at Tudor Hall, and also at the log house before that. And somebody got that from auction directly from Ella Mahoney. When she passed away, and her daughters went and put a lot of stuff up for auction, but they gave it back to us. We have that. We have a platter that belonged to the booths. They actually served food on it. And Ann Hall, who was their servant at the time, ended up obtaining that and giving it to Ella Mahoney, who lived there for 70 years. And she kind of turned it into a memorial at an area inside of that for the Edwin booth. We have forks that belong to Junius, silver forks that were given to him as a gift at the end of an engagement. And his initials are on it. There's a lot. There is a lot of stuff there that's very unusual. One is the stick furniture. It's like people would take branches and put all these strange branches together, a very unusual way, and turn it into like a table. And in fact, Alimony at one point had one made by John Wilkes Booth, but we don't have that. It was sold off. But we have 2 of those that were on the property there.
Wow. And you have a skull? You have a skull in this Tudor Hall residence?
Yes, the skull. It's not a real skull.
Okay.
It's the story of the skull.
Okay. What's the story of that, I'm afraid to ask?
Okay. Well, Junius traveled from town to town, and he went into town and found out someone was being tried for horse thievery and was going to be hung and did not have an attorney. And Junius said, well, I insist on paying for an attorney for him. And says, there's no point in doing that because he's just going to be hung anyway. Nope, he paid for it. And he was found guilty. But the person being hung was so appreciative to him. He says, I want you to have my skull and use that when you play Hamlet on stage.
Oh, my goodness. Stranger than fiction.
Yes.
Stranger than fiction. Speaking of fiction and acting, The Booth family, as you mentioned at the top of the show, were very well-known actors. Talk a little bit more about the other family members besides John Wilkes Booth and Junius.
Well, Junius Jr., the eldest, he was an actor, but he eventually ended up more managing theaters all across the United States. But he was acting. Edwin Booth, of course, became one of the greatest actors in the second half of the 19th century. He actually changed acting more to method acting. His father was more of the bombastic type. You go hit a mark. Walt Whitman loved him, a lot of people, but they did not like Edwin when he first started because they called it too feminine. But they kind of call him the godfather of method acting today, kind of the Stanislavski, Lee Strasberg type of acting that was developed later. And I've talked to a lot of theater historians, and they say not only was he the greatest in the 19th century, they think he was the greatest American stage actor, even up till today.
Wow.
Out of all of them.
Wow. Now, John Wilkes Booth actually practiced his acting from a balcony outside his bedroom. Let's take a look at that.
I am standing on the balcony off John Wilkes Booth's room. Now, interesting story about this balcony. There was a neighbor, Mrs. Rogers, on a farm next to this farm here, and when Tudor Hall was built, she referred to this balcony as the Romeo and Juliet balcony because John Wilkes Booth would rehearse from up here off his bedroom, and his sister Asia would be audience, and he was just learning to act when he was living here. So fascinating piece of history about the development of John Wilkes Booth's acting.
Hard to fathom that the young man practicing acting on that balcony would go on to assassinate a sitting United States president. A little history lesson, Tom. Remind us all of what led John Wilkes Booth to actually take on this what he considered important job of assassinating the president.
Yeah, it is interesting seeing that his father was an abolitionist. Edwin was an abolitionist, anti-slavery. But John never really spent much time with his father or brothers. They were on the road acting. They would be home in the summers, but that was about it. But he said boarding schools with a lot of where plantation owners would send their children. And he was raised around that and became part of that thinking. And first he was, when he first went down to New Orleans, he was all pro-union. Most people don't know that. And people started threatening him. But eventually he's went all pro-South and put his placard down and said, that's who I am, And even worked behind the scenes with some spies and other people in that. But the whole plan that he came up with was to kidnap Abraham Lincoln in order to get soldiers, prisoners of war exchanged. And it wasn't until the night of April 14th, the day of April 14th, that he decided to go ahead and assassinate him, which I find very strange since the Civil War was basically over.
Right.
And why would you do that? So he was so obsessed with it that time.
Talk about truth being stranger than fiction. There's also an amazing connection between John Wilkes Booth on the night of the assassination and the builders of Tudor Hall. Let's take a listen to this story.
Let's talk about John Wilkes Booth here at Tudor Hall. John was actually born on the property here, the Booth Farm, in 1838. And in 1850, his father, Junius, was thinking of retiring and wanted to build a retirement home. And the retirement home is here, Tudor Hall. Began construction on 1850. And the architect of this house, the builder, and one of the carpenters has a slight connection to the night of the assassination at Ford's Theater. James Gifford, the architect, built Tudor Hall, oversaw it, worked with Junius on it, and Edmund Spangler, a carpenter, did the grunt work on this house, and they both got to know John Wilkes Booth. Now, John was only 14 years old when his father died, and this house was completed in 1852. Let's fast forward to the night of the assassination of Ford's Theater. Now, James Gifford, the builder of this house, was also at Ford's Theater. He actually built Ford's Theater and worked with John T. Ford. Edmund Spangler, carpenter here on the property, building Tudor Hall, was also at Ford's Theater. John knew both of them very well, and they had quite a friendship. And the night of the assassination, John Wilkes Booth comes up with his horse behind the theater, comes in and asks Edmund Spangler, "Will you hold my horse?" He's basically, "Well, hold your horses," not really, but he said he got someone to hold his horse. He had no idea why he wanted him to hold the horse, because he didn't have time to do it, so he went back to moving scenery. And then when the assassination happened, John jumped back, ran right by him, went out, got on the horse, and left. So there's the connection. Strange, but true.
There's an old saying, you can't make this stuff up. And there's even another, in my mind, unbelievable connection between the Booths and the Lincolns. Talk about that.
Well, Robert Todd Lincoln? Yes. Robert Todd Lincoln was on his way home from college during the holidays to go visit his parents at the White House. And he was at the Jersey City station in New Jersey. And Edwin Booth and Edwin's friend, John T. Ford, were also traveling to D.C. also. And Robert Todd Lincoln was pretty close to the train, and a crowd came up and kind of bumped him into it. You ever hear, like, the New York City said, mind the gap? Because people do fall into there, the train takes off, they're killed. Well, he got bumped into it, Robert Todd, into there. And Edwin saw that, and the train started to move. Edwin reached down, grabbed him by the shoulder, his coat, pulled him up, and got him to safety. And of course, being the famous actor that he was, Robert Todd Lincoln recognized him right away and said, "Thank you, Mr. Booth." And Edwin got very embarrassed. He didn't even know who he was.
Right.
It wasn't until later he found out that was Robert Todd Lincoln. He had saved his life. And that was about a year before his brother John assassinated the father.
Unbelievable. So
yeah.
a Booth saves a Lincoln,
Yes.
and then another Booth kills a Lincoln.
Yes.
Just a remarkable.
Again, you can't make this stuff
No,
up.
you really can't. How was Tudor Hall used as either a stop in the Underground Railroad, on the Underground Railroad, or just in the overall abolition movement?
Well, when Richard Booth, that's Junius's father, came over in 1821, they rented a house, a log house next to the property where eventually they moved the log house onto there, and that's where Tudor Hall was built. So in 1824, they bought the log house they were actually renting from Mrs. Rogers next door, moved it over on rails and poles, and the whole town came up to see the whole log house over there. Actually be relocated, and the father and Junius at certain times would help escaped slaves get up to Pennsylvania. It was illegal in their time. It wasn't officially an underground railroad, but they weren't going to say no. But
Right.
they risked their lives and their careers
Right.
doing this, and I found that out by John T. Ford, who was very, very close friends with the Booths, and he knew that they did this, and also people in the area knew that the Booth form was used, that escaped slaves did use it to escape from. But that probably only happened between around, I would say, 1824 to maybe 1830 or whatever, because then the Booth kids would have grown up and there was no record of that happening. But a couple of times it did get caught. Junius ended up paying the slave owner for that. And
interesting architecture. It's kind of unique. It doesn't really fall into a specific category, does it?
well, it is actually a Gothic revival architecture. Junius purchased a book that was published in England in 1847 called The Architect by an architect named William Ranlett. And he picked out a pattern in there that was called the parsonage. And that's what he used to build Tudor Hall. In fact, in Tudor Hall, we do have a picture of the parsonage, and you can see the early picture of Tudor Hall. But it was a way of people in those days going, oh, we want to relive the good old days. And Gothic revival was the good old days then. So
Interesting.
yeah.
And inside there's one particularly unusual artifact with a message from Shakespeare's grave of all places. Let's take a look at that.
Right here we have an actual rubbing of the slab on Shakespeare's grave. Now, Edwin Booth, when he traveled over to England, did a rubbing himself, and he hung it in his room at the Players, a club he started in 1888, and dedicated it and gave it to the Players, and this was in his room. And there's a very interesting story with this. My wife, I was at Gramercy Park in the Players, and I actually saw this hanging in his bedroom. And I said, wow, I would love to get one of those for Tudor Hall. They don't do rubbings anymore, but eventually my wife found one on auction online, and we were able to get this. And I was like, oh, this belongs here. And it's very interesting because Shakespeare wrote this himself. It says, good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. So we're fortunate to have this here.
How do you preserve the history of a place that has so much history in it, Tom? It really looks like it would be just overwhelming.
Well, it's basically telling the story of what really happened there. And Harford County does a great job of keeping up the exterior, the property itself. It used to be originally 177 acres. It's down to like 8.3 now. But inside, it's just, we have all kinds of exhibits to tell the stories. Very fortunate to have a great group of volunteers. One of our docents, Judy Savage, does most of our tours at 1 o'clock. She does excellent tours. Jill Redding also does the same thing. But it's 2 o'clock in the last couple of years. They used to have tours and talks. Now it's all talks. I've been able to contact some of the top booth historians in the country. In fact, some of them around the world that be looked at internationally. And they do it for free. They'll come in and they'll give a talk. We only charge $5 for the talk. Mm-hmm. We charge $5 for the tour. None of us get paid. We're all volunteer. And all the money goes back into creating the exhibits and maintaining the museum.
Fantastic. Who owned Tudor Hall? You touched on it briefly, but who owned Tudor Hall after the booths, and how did Harford County eventually end up taking over?
Well, it was sold in 1878 to Samuel Kyle as basically as a wedding gift for his wife, Ella. We know her as Ella Mahoney now because it was her second husband. She lived there for 70 years.
Wow.
In fact, she actually grew up around the park. She knew a lot of the booths when she was growing up. Uh-huh. And her brothers and sisters, her father actually worked for the booths for a while on the farm. And she always had a great affinity for it. And that's what, she could have anything, that's what she wanted. And so for 70 years, she lived there. She actually turned the front room into kind of like a small museum. We have an actual picture in there of the museum that she started. And then it went on to several hands over the years. 1968, the Foxes, Howard and Dorothy Fox bought it, and they started an organization called the Preservation Association for Tudor Hall. And they wanted to, and that's when it still had a lot of the acreage left. They actually wanted to put a great big outdoor theater on it and make it one of the largest draws for the East Coast. But after that, the Foxes owned it, then the Bakers owned it, and it went up for auction in 2006, and that's when the county got it. And I know Ella Mahoney, going through her writing, says, I always wish that someone would end up with Tudor Hall who would turn it into a memorial for Edwin Booth.
Wow.
And it looks like she got her wish.
She sure did.
Through the county. And it's just,
Wow.
we're so fortunate for this to still be standing.
Yeah, kudos to
Really.
Harford County for recognizing that
Yes.
opportunity. How about the events coming up this year, 2026? You have a full slate. Just mention one that you think is going to be really good. And I know you have a million, but mention-
I just got done with them.
yeah, you got a whole page of them
Oh,
here,
yeah.
right?
Let's go through Lincoln, Shakespeare and the Brothers Booth, Grief, Celebrity, Redemption, Edwin Booth and the Rebirth of American Theater, Patriarchal Patriot, Richard Booth, father of Junius Brutus Booth. Goes on and on and on. Just different aspects of the whole family. It's not all about John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth gets him to the door, and we
Right.
introduce him to the rest of the Booths.
That's a good way
and
to
keep
put
that
it.
history alive.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. He gets them to the door. That's right. You have a website or any other best way for people to find out information and dates of things happening?
Yes, just Google, let's go on and put Spirits of Tudor Hall with one word. And what'll pop up is Spirits of Tudor Hall Facebook, then Spirits of Tudor Hall Blogspot. If you go on to Blogspot, it would give you all the dates. It'll give you all the speakers, the bios of the speakers, what's coming up in that year. And on the Facebook, it talks about, current events that's happening at the museum and the history, but also who's up next. But those are the two things, Spirits of Tudor Hall.
I'll bet you every single time you walk into that place, even though you've been there 1,000 times before, you feel something, don't you? You feel like you're walking into a history vault.
I really do. And a lot of times there by myself. I'll go in, I'm out at least once to twice a week. I check on it every week, make sure there's nothing wrong, or if, like broken pipes or trees going down. But sometimes I'm in there alone and you can hear the rain and the thunder and hitting the tin roof and go, it's so quiet. You just wonder how quiet it was when they actually lived there. And here they are walking the halls. And yeah, you're walking where they walked, live where they lived, following in their footsteps.
Well, I can tell you, Tom, we're very thankful. We as citizens are very thankful that you and people like you preserve history like this, and want to let you know how much we appreciate all your work with Tudor Hall.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's great to have you here, and thank you very much for watching Inside Harford County, airing exclusively on Harford TV. Join us again next month. On behalf of the entire crew here, I'm Mark Vernarelli. Thanks for watching.